The National Lotteries Commission became a symbol of state capture era corruption, with hundreds of millions meant for communities looted for luxury cars and houses. But what about the people inside who tried to blow the whistle and lost their jobs, their safety and their peace of mind? The NLC has now launched a unique reparations process for those whistleblowers and harmed staff. To explain how it works and why it's taken this form, we are joined via Zoom by the NLC Commissioner, Jody Scholtz. Commissioner, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Now, critics might see this as a soft option after people lost their livelihoods and faced terrifying intimidation. Why is the primary response psychological support and education sponsorships instead of direct financial compensation for their losses?
Good afternoon, Hugo, and good afternoon to your viewers. The NLC has wanted to create a learning model and a learning framework instead of a liability model. And I think that's critically important as a first point. Secondly, the Reparations initiative is intended to be a healing approach. And that's certainly the approach that the board has taken. So we've looked at a range of measures that we could implement and institute to provide support to those whistleblowers who've identified corruption and fraud within the National Lotteries Commission.
Commissioner, let's go back to, we'll take a look at how long has this process taken from the time that the whistleblowers were impacted by the various testimonies or information they gave to this point that we've arrived at?
The process started around 2023 with the former Minister of Trade and Industry, who then had indicated we needed to look at some kind of support for whistleblowers. The National Lotteries Commission hasn't had the benefit of a commission of inquiry into how this should be done. And so we've had to put together a process which consisted of bringing in independent advisors, creating listening platforms to hear their experiences, to understand the depth of those experiences. And then we've needed to make sure from an auditing point of view, because we are a creature of statute, we're governed by both the Lotteries Act, the PFMA, as well as a range of other statutes, that in trying to heal and create space for these individuals, we don't then inadvertently create unnecessary attention in terms of non-compliance to other legislation.
Commissioner, you've indicated that you did a huge amount of research, a lot of engagement, right? Let's talk about that engagement with the various individuals. Let's call them victims, if you will, and you coming up with the healing process or the healing approach. Is this what they were looking for?
Mixed bag, Hugo. Some say yes and some say no. I am aware that some individuals were looking for financial compensation. Unfortunately, that's not the approach that the Lotteries Commission has taken. We've tried, the measures that we've put in place are around trying to provide educational support to both individuals and all their families and their children. And that would also look at a range of, sports equipment or whatever equipment children need for schooling. There are psychosocial therapy sessions. We've included a wellness session as well as food vouchers. And that's the totality of the package that we've put together.
Now, what is the value of loss that was prevented, exposed by these whistleblowers?
We haven't been able to quantify that, Hugo, but we are aware that the SIU, I think in last year, had indicated that the amount, the corruption at the National Lotteries Commission was in the region of about 1.4 billion rand. We haven't been able to quantify the exact amount.
Sorry, Commissioner. So, I mean, the amount of corruption that's been exposed is 1.4 billion rand, and you're talking about giving these individuals tennis rackets and football boots, right? There seems to be a discrepancy, almost an unfeeling, if you will, right? That these individuals put their lives on their line. Their lives were absolutely disrupted from the reports that we've read, and you're going to give them tennis rackets.
No, Hugo, that's not what I said. I said that we would allow for sports equipment for their children because we recognize the impact that this has had on their families.
Tennis racket is sports equipment, Commissioner.
The reparations, and I think this is the point that many people miss, is that reparations is not equivalent to damages. When we looked at the case of SARS had the Nugent Commission to guide their work. reparations and damages are two fundamentally different concepts. So reparations and the approach that we've taken as the National Lotteries Commission is to acknowledge that harm had been caused. And damages are a particular separate legal process entirely, and that wasn't the intention of this process.
Now, the process has been described, Commissioner, as being bogged down in red tape, taking several months. Now, given the urgent needs of these individuals, do you accept that the NLC's process has been too slow? And if you do, what exactly caused those delays?
I do accept that the process has been slow, Hugo, and we've received that feedback, and we ourselves have been very mindful of ensuring that we've needed to do this. We are governed by the PFMA, and so in all of this, one has to ensure adherence to applicable legislation, and that's been the biggest sticky point for us as the National Lotteries Commission. But we've concluded this process. It's focused on former and current staff members, and the next phase is to look at community individuals, and that is part of our normal operations processes that we're going to undertake.
Now, transparency is obviously a major concern, Commissioner. You've chosen not to name beneficiaries or detail the awards, while we understand safety concerns without any public disclosure. How do South Africans trust that this process is substantive and not just a symbolic PR exercise? And I have to harp on that 1.4 billion exposure, right? And sports equipment.
The 1.4 billion is the totality of all of the corruption. It's not just limited to these individuals. That's what the SIU is currently has under investigation. The measures are intended to assist. As I'd indicated, it's an acknowledgement. It's not damages.
Okay, now ultimately, this is the reparations process mostly about healing the internal wounds of the NLC, or its success fundamentally tied to whether the communities who were robbed, the old age homes, the sports field, finally see their projects being built?
So the community infrastructure projects are not part of the reparations process. We have deliberately delineated that. That's part of our operations process. You are aware that we do have a research-based funding approach. And so what we've done is the SIU has indicated to us there are about 24 properties across the country in various stages of disrepair. We've sent out our provincial managers to do an assessment, and we've staggered this. Obviously, it requires quite an extensive amount of capacity. We've been able to bring on the necessary engineering support because we do need to go into these communities, understand, first of all, do community members actually want these facilities? The case in the Northern Cape, it was initially cited to be a drug rehabilitation centre. The community have now come back to say to us they actually want a skills development centre. So the specs for a drug rehab centre versus a skills development centre are fundamentally different. And so we've needed to, with the communities, unpack and understand what they want. And then the intention is to take this to the board and then allocate funding from our research-based allocation to then fix up these properties.
And finally, before we let you go, Commissioner, I'd imagine that you've had some conversation with some of the whistleblowers. What was their reaction to the reparations that you're proposing?
Hugo, it's been a mixed bag of reactions. Some have been very unhappy, and others have been quite satisfied that the process has given them, one, the opportunity to be heard, that their experiences have been validated, and then also that that we've recognized that harm had been done to them.
Commissioner Jody Scholtz, NLC Commissioner, speaking to us on the reparations that have been extended to some whistleblowers from the National Lottery Commission.